Now this is just absolutely genius from Enzo Maresca. Lads, lasses and the rest of the masses, welcome back to another tactical breakdown. Today we're going to be taking a look at Chelsea versus Aston Villa and seeing how 3 simple tactical decisions made this so easy for Chelsea to get a 3-0 victory. Let's go. So firstly, let's talk about how Chelsea set up in this game, because the formation was slightly different to what we've seen in recent games. And in fact, when the lineup actually came out, a lot of us were kind of confused because there was only 3 defenders listed in the starting 11, that being Marc Cucurella, Levi Colwill and Wesley Fofana. Yes, Malo Gusto, who was our usual right back, was absent from the starting 11, and instead we saw Moises Caicedo playing in this right back role. But we knew he was never going to stay out here as this pure right back. We knew that the way that Enzo Maresca likes to set up his Chelsea team is with an inverted fullback. We always see it, and every single time it's going to be Malo Gusto that like to do this inversion. We can do the same thing with Moises Caicedo and put him into the central role alongside Romeo Lavia as a midfield 2, and stretch the back line into a back 3 with Marc Cucurella playing as this hybrid left back / left centre back role, which he has thrived in the past. Now what this does is it creates this box midfield like we always see, and I've spoken about this a lot in the past, but just a quick breakdown of what this means for us is that these 4 in the centre will always give us a numerical advantage against 3-man midfields. And against Aston Villa, they played a 3-man midfield, they play a 4-3-3, and when they have their 3 midfielders in here, we outnumber them 4-3. It helps us navigate the midfield of the pitch really easily because we always have a spare man to pass to. And if we actually bring the players in here, we have McGinn, we have Kamara, and we have Tielemans, who are the 3 midfielders. You can see how we always will have, if we match the players up, there will always be one spare man, whether that be Palmer in space, who was man marked out of this game, so he was not going to be the one that was in space, whether this be Enzo on this side, or if they play a bit more defensive and they bring McGinn back, Caicedo is going to be the free man. There's always going to be a spare man for us to pass to, because we are outnumbering them in the middle of the pitch. But obviously there are other advantages to having this setup, and the way that we set up with the 3 at the back is in offensive capabilities too. Now, we always talk about this, but the 1v1s that we create out wide with our wingers is incredibly important for this system and the way that we like to play. We like to make our 1v1s out wide. We feel like we would win those 1v1s and be able to kind of progress us into the box with good dribbling or one-on-one wing play. But also with the striker, we like to see the striker up against the centre-back and create that 1v1. One of our midfielders, either Enzo or Palmer, will also get up here and match up with Torres or whoever else is the left centre-back at this time. And as you can see, we match up 4-for-4 here with the midfield 3 now actually being equal. Now, as I said in the intro, there were 3 tactical decisions that Enzo Maresca made in this game that I thought really helped us win this game. And as we get into the first one here, I'd like to ask you to subscribe to the channel. It really helps me out. And if you like these types of tactical breakdowns and this type of tactical analysis, then you'll enjoy the rest of the videos that I have on the channel where I speak about this kind of thing all the time. But as I was saying, let's get into the first point. And the one thing which I want to talk about, we'll talk about us in possession first. The wingers really got wide and hugged the touchline in order to stretch out the defence, and this was the major thing that we saw first. With us playing at this 3 at the back system, we almost saw Neto and Sancho, instead of playing really high up and up against their fullbacks at times, we saw them kind of drop a little bit deeper. Now Sancho and Neto would drop really close to the touchline, getting chalk on their boots, and give our team and our centre-backs, particularly when they were in possession, the option to seek them out in these wide areas where they are out in space. Because obviously Cash and Digne are not going to track all the way up here and leave this space in behind when they go out here. So what we kind of inevitably saw was Dean and Cash staying back, Sancho and Neto dropping a bit deeper, and us able to get the ball to them out in these wide areas in order to not only get us in possession in these wide areas, but also create space in the more central areas of the pitch. When we get the ball here with Neto and he gets to drive up a little bit closer to Digne, Digne is obviously going to come out here and try and mark him, and we're also going to see McGinn, who is on this left hand side, try and come over to double up. And what that allows is for Palmer in this inside right position to get more space on the ball because McGinn is committed over to him. Now Palmer is the player that we've seen in the recent games that we've played is getting man marked out of games because of how influential he can be on games. We see that again in this game, how influential he was, but he was kind of shrouded out of the game for the majority of the time because he was getting so much focus from McGinn and Kamara. Now, as I said, we like to create 1v1s out wide, and our idea here is to get this 1v1 with Neto and Digne or Sancho and Cash on the opposite side And if we are winning this battle the majority of the time, which Neto was, McGinn would eventually have to kind of double up and stop him from being able to just easily bypass Digne, and that would open this kind of pocket of space for Palmer. Obviously, he has to navigate Kamara as well, who was also doing a very good job at trying to shut out Palmer, but he had to be a bit more mindful of Jackson, who was also occupying the two centre-backs, and be a bit mindful of Enzo if he came over. Obviously, if Caicedo came a bit higher up the pitch and Palmer went a bit more central, then that creates another option for them to have to mark, and it just allows us to kind of navigate the ball as we kind of progress by getting the ball out wide first, shifting all the players over, and then creating not only the space centrally, but also creating space out on the other wing as the players kind of shift over to overlap onto this side. Now, another thing that we saw in possession is the way that we navigated Aston Villa's press. Now, we know that Aston Villa are a very industrious team, especially in the midfield. They have a lot of players that will like to put themselves about. They have a lot of energy, a lot of stamina, a lot of drive to win the ball back, and especially in these high areas where they pressed up higher, they obviously had Morgan Rogers, they had Ollie Watkins and Philogene up here, and when we had the ball in our own third, it was imperative that we managed to get out of these scenarios by playing the ball into our two press-resistant midfielders here. Now, I think playing Caicedo in this hybrid right-back / right centre-mid role is absolutely genius from Enzo Maresca, and it really shows the flexible tactics that he uses, and also just the versatile nature of Moises Caicedo, because he can play in a numerous amount of positions, but this one is one that really suits him, not only because, again, he can get back and offer this right back kind of role and be a bit more defensive when Aston Villa are on the ball, but when we are in the ball in these scenarios and he comes into this central role, he is, like Lavia as well, in his own right, is very, very press resistant. When the ball goes into him in these areas and McGinn presses up, he's not going to stay here. He can obviously just pass it back and recycle possession, but a lot of the time what we saw from both Caicedo and Lavia when Tielemans would step on him is that they would spin, they would go around, and they'd get forward, play the ball forward into space, into either Palmer or Enzo, whichever one wasn't being marked. It was usually Enzo on this left-hand side, as Kamara was kind of man-marking Palmer for the majority of the game. We'd see this go up to Enzo, and then obviously Enzo can progress us forward. And it really stopped Aston Villa from implementing one of their main threats, and that is that industry, that is that ability to win the ball back high and create danger in the opposing third after winning the ball in their own third. Now, I think it's important to mention that we were able to rotate our entire 11 from our midweek game, whereas Aston Villa weren't able to do that from their game in the Champions League. Now, this obviously impacted the way that Aston Villa were able to press and impacted the way that they were able to keep going in this game. They were obviously a little bit more tired than we were, and we kind of saw from our midfield being a bit more on top of them for the majority of the game that they really struggled to kind of keep up with Lavia, and especially Caicedo, who again was just absolutely superb in this game. Other players like Cucurella was also very, very up for it, really, really aggressive, able to win the ball back, and just they weren't able to keep up with us because, again, they were a bit more tired than we were, and I think we used that energy, that extra energy that we had, to our advantage. So that was point number 2, the press-resistant midfield, and the reason why we kind of found it easier to navigate away from their offensive threats. But the real kicker is us out of possession. Our out of possession play was what won us this game, not our in possession play, which is a bit bizarre. You'd think that it would be our in possession play, especially considering we had so much possession, that was actually able to help us create chances and help us to get the goals, but it was actually our out of possession formation and the way that we set up in this 5-5 press. Now, I'm going to remove the players to make this a little bit easier to see, but the way that we usually set up out of possession is that we will obviously drop Caicedo back into right back, and we'll play a kind of 4-4-2 with obviously Caicedo dropping back. We play we get our wingers that will drop back to kind of help defend, and then we'll leave Palmer and Jackson as the two up top with Enzo and Lavia in this midfield. But we don't do that immediately. We do that specifically when Aston Villa are in our final third, or whichever opponent we're up against are in our final third, whereas what we usually do in these scenarios is we counter press, and our counter press is the biggest thing about this team, and the reason why we are so successful is that counter press, because we leave 5 players up here in the offensive third and we leave 5 players back in the defensive third. And it's that 5-5 formation that kind of stops them from being able to do anything. Obviously, we see here when they have the back line, we'll actually bring the midfield back in to kind of show this a little bit more. They have this 5 with their back 4 and Kamara, and we have this 5 with Neto, Palmer, Enzo, Sancho and Jackson. And what we like to see is we will step on the gas and we will press them, but it's not just presses, right? We'll press them and obviously help them or try and force them to play into our hand. And what we do is we set traps. We are very, very good in when we play this really high line. We bring Caicedo and Lavia up here. We bring Fofana, Colwill, and Cucurella to the halfway line. Obviously, I'm just going to tuck Cucurella in here so you can see him. We tuck these guys in to the halfway line. We press really, really high with a high line. Now, what this enables us to do is not only, as I said, put on pressure and make them, force them to kind of play into our hands, but we're setting traps here. We want them to not only be forced to play the ball long, which they did quite a lot of the time in this game. They played the ball long up to Rodgers and Watkins. Not Philogene as much, I'll leave him out. But Rodgers and Watkins were kind of left up top. All three of them were left up top at times to kind of be here and be ready to receive the long pass when they played it, because they were under so much pressure and they had no real other options. Now, Colwill and Fofana were dealing with Watkins pretty well, and if they weren't winning those duels, the ball was just going all the way over back to Sanchez on the edge of the box, and we would recycle possession and keep going that way, and that's how we would get the ball back. But the main thing wasn't just this, it was we were kind of trying to allow Aston Villa to get a bit of confidence and allow them to play out from the back instead of playing it long, so we could steal the ball back in the midfield and then attack them on the counter attack. Now, we kept seeing this happen with Caicedo and Lavia, and again, it's the reason why these two, and especially Caicedo, who is so good at doing this, is so important, is that we give them the option of McGinn and Tielemans, who will drop deep, to be able to get the ball to, right? They outnumber us now here. They have 7 players here with an 8 with the goalkeeper, and we only have the 5. So what happens is that Konza will kind of press this way, and Konza will play the ball to Tielemans, or Torres will play it to McGinn, and Lavia would instantly snap into a tackle and win the ball back from him, because this is where we want the ball to go. And once we win the ball, we play it quickly and try and get our attack going. Now, we actually see this for 2 of the goals that we score. The first one is actually not Lavia, it's actually Cucurella, who presses really, really high up the pitch, wins the ball off of Philogene, I think, who actually dropped deep to kind of collect the ball here because Tielemans was not able to get it. But he drops really, really deep to get the ball. Cucurella snaps into a tackle, wins the ball off him, plays a 1-2, gets into the box, and then crosses it across for Jackson for a tap-in the 7th minute of the game. This happened so quickly, and it set the precedent of what we wanted to do. We wanted to start fast, step on the gas against them, and not allow them to play their football. Now, we also see this exact same thing happen for Enzo Fernandez's goal, and it's Lavia this time who wins the ball. The ball gets played out again. Lavia wins the ball quickly up high. I think it's up against Tielemans, I'm not sure. He wins the ball up high, plays it into Enzo, who plays a nice ball to Palmer, who plays it back to Enzo, and pings it into the far corner with an outside of the foot shot against Emi Martinez, who was unable to save it. Now, we kept seeing these same types of scenarios happen. We also see Jackson, of course, steal the ball off of Emi Martinez, which eventually leads to him having to go off the pitch. I don't think it was actually a hand injury why he had to come off. I think he injured his back earlier trying to save another shot, which he was kind of complaining about, but I digress. Jackson, we see steal the ball off of Emi Martinez and get an opportunity and nearly score that way, but it was that constant feeling of allowing Aston Villa to feel a bit comfortable, allowing them to try and play good football and try and play the way out, which is brave. But the issue is, the reason why this doesn't work against us is that the way that we set up, you have to be absolutely perfect in order to play out against this type of hyper press. They have to get every single pass right, and they have to be able to play it to the spare man every single scenario. If they do not find that spare man in one of those passes, in that passing move, we will win the ball back. Now, to Aston Villa's credit, they did manage to do this a few times, actually. There was one in particular where we see Digne get on the ball really far up the pitch down the left-hand side, and then cross the ball in for Watkins, who gets an opportunity because they played some really neat football out here on the right after we pressed. But for the majority of the time, they weren't able to do this. And obviously, again, Tielemans and McGinn were finding it really, really hard. They weren't as press resistant as Lavia and Caicedo in their own right. Every time we did this to them, they kept giving the ball to us. And every time they did it to us, we were able to quickly navigate our way out and find the spare man and play up the pitch. And as I said, that just made them resort to doing long balls because they couldn't play it out from the back. So they had to keep trying to find Watkins long or find Rodgers long, and it didn't work. And it helped us kind of just keep recycling recycling the ball and then putting the pressure on them, and able to kind of pass the ball around and try and create our own avenues by getting it out to the wide areas, creating those 1v1s, trying to get space in for Palmer, which eventually we do in the second half. We eventually get the ball to Palmer in these central roles. They don't mark him as well, and he gets that beautiful finish into the far corner. We see a little bit of magic from Palmer that gets us our third goal, and that doesn't really come from one of those presses, but the majority of our goals did. And in general, this was just really difficult for Aston Villa to play, because not only were we doing this, but Chelsea made this game scrappy. There was about 17, I think, nearly 20 fouls in this game where we just broke up the play. And we stopped Aston Villa from getting their rhythm. Now, it wasn't just because we kept breaking up the play and stopping them from making their rhythm, but every time we gave them a free kick and gave them the ball back from a foul, they would have to play the ball back to their defenders and try and recycle possession and build again. And every time they had to build again, we would step on them again and play this 5 up top and try and make them pass it into our hands. And it just forced them to play the way that we wanted to play. They were not able to play in the way that they wanted to play, and I think that if Aston Villa were able to play in the way that they wanted, I think they would have gotten a few more opportunities. They got, as I said, they did have their own moments in this game. They had a lot of chances, which Sanchez was able to stop the majority of. I think he had a very good game for his standards. He was stopping a lot of the shots that were coming his way, but also his long distribution was a bit better. And as I kind of highlighted earlier, that ability to have our wingers really wide allowed him to be a bit better with his long distribution, able to find those guys out in the wide areas. But I think that Aston Villa, for the most part, struggled to really create any good chances other than the ones that Sanchez was easily able to save. And again, maybe that is down to the fact that they were a bit tired, a bit lackadaisical from playing in midweek in the Champions League, and we weren't, because we rotated our side, but they really weren't able to get to grips with the game. And for the majority of the time, Chelsea absolutely dominated possession, dominated the ball, and dominated the game. This was overall a very good performance against a team that ultimately wants to be fighting for a place in the top 4, answering some questions about Enzo Maresca and whether he could set this Chelsea team up to dominate opponents like we saw him do with Leicester in the Championship. We move on to bottom place Southampton, and we will likely see another strong performance. I will be live streaming on this channel before the game to give my pre-match thoughts, predicted lineups, and more, so you don't want to miss that. But if you want something else to watch, maybe check out one of these 2 videos on the screen in the meantime. Thank you guys so much for watching as ever, and remember, in the rain or in the dry, keep that blue flag flying high. Come on, you Blues.